Hello, my name is David Ferguson.
And I'm Sean Patterson, and we are the directors of Rewired Consulting.
We would like to welcome you to the Rewired Consulting Podcast, featuring guests from across the IT industry.
We will be talking to technology leaders from all over New Zealand, providing unique insight and good chat with the people on the front line of innovation and transformation.
This series will give you a great opportunity to hear the stories of the people involved and create the strategy and vision for some of New Zealand's most interesting businesses. This episode is sponsored by SmartSpace AI, the enterprise platform that reduces AI deployment time from months to minutes. With SmartSpace, you can start developing AI solutions immediately, thanks to our pre-built infrastructure. Our platform empowers you to build and deploy generative AI use cases without limitations, whether you're rapidly prototyping or scaling production use cases. Gain full control over AI models and resources while integrating seamlessly with your existing systems. Best of all, instead of spending hundreds of thousands of dollars building generative AI infrastructure from scratch, you can get started for as low as $400 a month. Ready to accelerate your AI journey and unlock new possibilities? Visit smartspace.ai or connect with us through the Azure Marketplace. SmartSpace AI, building insights, not infrastructure.
Guys, welcome back to the Rewired Consulting Podcast with myself, Sean Patterson, and co-host David Ferguson. And today we're delighted to have on transformation leader Paul Stevens. So originally from Newcastle, the northeast of England, Paul's career had humble beginnings selling car accessories from a small shop in Whitley Bay, a charming coastal town near Newcastle upon Tyne. But his journey took a big turn when he emigrated to New Zealand after finishing school and diving into the world of banking and finance before making his way into tech. Paul's love for problem solving and people led him to Air New Zealand's IT service desk, a job he adored because it allowed him to chat with people all day and help them out, a theme that continued throughout his career. With Air New Zealand investing in his IT training, Paul built a thriving career in project delivery, working across industries to lead complex programs, develop PMOs, and establish successful portfolios. With over 30 years of experience driving transformation across business and shared service portfolios, Paul brings a pragmatic, results-driven approach to leadership. He's improved delivery capacity, enhanced efficiency, and built high-performing teams across industries, including telco, finance, media, healthcare, insurance, and not-for-profit sectors. Whether it's HR, cybersecurity, health and safety, or cloud transformation programs, Paul focuses on governance, culture, and sustainable success without losing sight of the customer. Outside of work, Paul is a dedicated family man, married with a daughter who now calls Sydney home. Once dreaming of a career in music, he played in several bands over the years, and while he might not be selling out stadiums, he keeps his passion alive through an ever-growing vinyl collection. So Paul, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Thank you. I'm well, and thank you. Great intro.
Good stuff. In fact, we can maybe do a separate podcast at some point, Paul, discussing your sort of rock star career, because I think a lot of people will tune in for that.
Oh, is that not what we were doing today?
But David, what do you think? We could maybe do that another time, right?
Yeah, keen.
It wouldn't be that interesting. It didn't last for that long, but it's always been a passion of mine.
Paul, thanks again for coming on. But I think what we like to do is obviously go back a little bit and hear about kind of how our guests got into IT. So I think the Air New Zealand part is a great place to start. And like so many people that come on the podcast, it seems as though that the service desk seems to be a real popular place for people to find their feet in IT. So can you tell us a little bit kind of about that and how Air New Zealand helped you kind of kick off your IT career?
Yeah, look, sure. So Air New Zealand was a bit of an accident for me. I had been working in banking and finance, and not dissimilar to the situation that we find ourselves at the moment. The market got quite hard for banking and finance people, and there was a lot of downsizing. So I found myself out on the street looking for work, and I knew somebody who worked at Air New Zealand, and they were able to introduce me to somebody who liked the way that I looked and I talked, and decided to take a punt on me entering into their IT service desk. So here's a guy who had very little technical background, but I think the things that work and have worked for me throughout my career As one as I have I'm very inquisitive about things, but I think I have a natural style. So if you think about the service desk, and you're talking to people, and part of the intro, I love talking. I like talking to people. I like to understand, how they operate. What their problems are, and I'm a solutions guy. My wife, when she comes home from work and she gets to the front door, she will typically say, if something's happened, she said, "Paul, I just want you to listen to me. I don't want you to solve this problem." So I have a natural bent. Whenever people start talking to me about things that are going on, my mind immediately goes to, how can I solve this problem? So the IT service desk, probably one of the most enjoyable jobs that I've had. But clearly it was a job that was going to be a stepping stone to something else. So I ended up doing about 10 years at Air New Zealand. So a year with the service desk. And I was a guy that was kind of jockeying and trying to, to figure out the next path in my career. So whenever an opportunity came up within New Zealand, whether it was a new role or training, I was always putting my hand up for it. So I was very proactive. So from the service desk, I went into more of a service delivery type of role, which was very much in the tech center. So I was rapidly learning about technology, and I was being sent on lots of different courses all the time. Some stuck, some didn't stick. I mean, I think that's just kind of the nature of training. But I started to kind of develop myself towards being that conduit for customers between IT and business. That's kind of my sweet spot. So I purposefully made a decision quite early that that's where I wanted to sit. So I didn't want to be a techie. I needed to know enough to be able to talk to my customers, in a language that they understood, and to be able to help to solve their problems. So 10 years at Air New Zealand, moved up through, service delivery type of channel, moved into the business area later in my career there. So, but still, technology related. So I worked for finance and HR, and I was the delivery manager for them. So on the finance side, looking after their Oracle financial systems, which then pivoted towards, moved towards PeopleSoft, and HR were also kind of interlinked into that technology stack as well. So I built up a team of, analysts and support people to help deliver, technology. And with the finance side of things, there was quite a heavy reliance on financial capability as well. So I was hiring people who had, technology and finance understanding. So that was,
can I just ask?
yeah, sure.
Well, just yeah, because you're going through quite a long period of time with Air New Zealand as well. Look, Air New Zealand at that stage when you joined them, were they in that stage where they were starting to go through some really, really rapid growth? And how did, like, from the technology perspective as well, how much were they using technology to enable the customer focus side, or was it more internal type focus stuff? Like just to get a bit of a feel for like that sort of time frame and what Air New Zealand were doing.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting question, and you've kind of reminded me. So at the time that I was working at Air New Zealand, there was a lot of things going on in the airline industry. So you guys would be too young to remember this, but Air New Zealand purchased an airline in Australia called Ansett, and I spent quite a lot of time actually in Melbourne working around that integration of the two airlines. And people who remember that time in New Zealand, and hopefully I'm not talking out of school here, but in New Zealand hadn't really done proper due diligence of Ansett, and they were actually in a really, really poor state. So we had to rapidly extract ourselves from Ansett. Because it was going to pull Air New Zealand down. The government stepped in at that time to fund Air New Zealand. So about the middle of my career at Air New Zealand, all of a sudden, Air New Zealand didn't have a lot of money, and they were desperately trying to do the best they could with the technology stack that they had. So we moved into a time of trying to do everything on the smell of an oily rag. Fortunately, things turned around under good leadership, where they started to grow again. And you talk about the technology stack. So at the time, PeopleSoft was quite a big player in the market, and New Zealand was keen to move into that stack. So that became part of my later life at Air New Zealand. But yeah, it was tough times in the middle there because of what happened with Ansett. And people who remember that time will remember, and people who've worked at Air New Zealand during that time will understand the the challenges that we had. Look, I was lucky to have a job, and my wife and I just started a family there, and we had a big mortgage and all the rest of it. So it was a pretty stressful time. But look, fortunately, somebody was looking out for me, and I managed to work through that.
Did you find? So obviously, this was your second career. Did you find
yes
there was stuff from obviously your previous career, stuff you had done back in the UK? Was there stuff that you learned on in terms of experience, or was it just completely different and new and fresh?
Look, it was completely different for me. It was so yeah. If you go back to my car accessory selling days, I mean that was I don't know. In some ways, I wish that I'd had a more of a selling career. I quite enjoyed sales, but it never kind of worked that way. Banking and finance, I was okay. So actually, banking and finance, the last role that I had was a client. Was it sales? Yeah, I guess it was sales and advisory. But I was never that great. Compared to my colleagues, we used to have a daily stand up. They'd talk about what was happening in the markets, and I pretty much parrot fashion repeated this back to my clients. But I had a good client base, and I had a good rapport with my clients because I like to talk and I build relationships. So I think that kind of played into my career. So I established in banking and finance, not from an industry point of view, but I learnt my chops in terms of people and relationships and how important they are to to gain that trust. So people will trust you and allow you to help them.
Yeah. Okay. And also, because this is just touching back, you obviously moved here from the UK as well. Like in terms of your attitude and how you approach work and stuff like that, do you think coming from outside of New Zealand helped you in terms of like trying to get a foot up, or was that a thing for you?
So it was kind of interesting because I was a bit of a novelty to Kiwis because if people remember the introduction, I come from northeast England, so I'm a Geordie, and I had a very thick Geordie accent, and that was curious for people. So and being an extrovert and people were curious about where I'd come from, my accent. It was a fairly obvious kind of thing for me, and just the type of person that I am. Yeah. So arriving in New Zealand, I was a bit of a novelty, and you will probably hear my accent now. Any Geordies out there will be calling me a fraud, but I'm also a bit of a mimic. So whenever I go to different places and hear different accents, quite often they become my own. I know we spent a couple of weeks in Hawaii on a family holiday many years ago, and we were there for a couple of weeks, and I came back with a bit of American accent because I'd been talking to people in shops and listening to the way they construct their sentences, the words that they use, and kind of the intonation as well.
Yeah.
I took my family back to Newcastle in 2016, a wee while ago. My cousin still lives in Newcastle, and when I got off the plane, I started to talk to her in the Geordie accent, and my family had never heard me talk with a Geordie accent before. So that was, that's just
bit of a chameleon then, Paul. Yeah.
Yeah, very much a chameleon.
and that look, being able to adapt to different situations as well. It obviously works into your work life as well. You know what I mean? That's the thing.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. So like Air New Zealand, it sounds like you were through a lot of different roles there. But it seems like there was obviously a natural progression towards that leadership side of things and that relationship side of things. So can you talk about how you decided that was the pathway for you, sort of those sort of early learnings as well?
Yep. Yeah, so Air New Zealand offered me my first leadership position. It came about around at the same time as that Ansett situation that I just talked about. And I tend to lean into things, so I'm naturally kind of volunteer and put myself into the face of challenges. But I remember my first. So I don't know. I think had about 6 or 8 people working for me, and I remember my first team meeting with them, and I was a bit concerned. I called a meeting. Everybody turned up. I had an agenda. I did all the things that you would expect to do as part of a meeting, but it didn't flow particularly well, and I wasn't kind of getting the engagement that I wanted. So I was a little bit disappointed. So I pulled one of the chaps aside afterwards, and I said, "Hey, look, what do I need to do? I didn't feel like I got a lot of engagement out of people from the meeting." And he said, "Well, you set up the meeting. You were the boss. We all accepted because you are the boss." He said, "But you picked the worst day and time of the week for us to meet because it's a busy day, and I think it was a Thursday from memory, and the Thursday morning was a pretty critical time for putting reports together and things like that." And I went, okay. So that was a great learning for me. So I put it back on the team. I said, "Oh, well, you guys tell me when is the best time to meet. There are some things that I want to talk about, and I need to know from a managing up point of view. But what do you guys want to talk about as well?" So I threw it back to the team to be more kind of self-managing, and that was a great learning for me early, because I've used that sort of thing for leading teams subsequently.
How would you describe your sort of, obviously from your working in so many different industries, Paul, and obviously different teams and stuff like that. How would you describe your leadership style? How's that evolved over the years that you've been doing it?
Yeah, look, it's and coming back to what I was saying just before, I've always been a guy that kind of volunteers and steps into things when other people wouldn't. So I've always had that kind of natural leadership, I guess, if you like. I'm not the guy that is the expert in the room. So I'm not leading from that perspective. I want to create teams that have some safety to be able to experiment. So, I want to set people up for success, and that's typically how I will talk to people and talk to teams. You're the experts in your field. That's why we've hired you. I'm there to help and manage any roadblocks. And when things go wrong, I'm there to support you and to help you to navigate through those things. And I was actually just talking to somebody recently about this. And when I've been in situations, and particularly with the IT service desk, well, not that particular role, but working in the IT at Air New Zealand, things go wrong. You have outages and all the rest of it. So there's a couple of things that I think about when something goes wrong is, how do I ring fence the person who's trying to solve the problem? Because typically they are known, right? And everybody would be ringing and say, "Hey, what's going on? When it's going to be fixed." So you need to be able to ring fence them and put something around them to protect them from that, so they can get on with doing the job. And the other thing that I quite often use as a bit of a technique when something happens is, has anybody been in this situation before? And if so, what worked, what didn't work. So you're a little bit, ahead of the ball. If somebody's actually experienced this before, you can use those learnings, good and bad, to help you to kind of figure out what you're going to do to fix the problem. So they're the sort of things that I do. And my leadership style is very much in encouraging people, and not providing the solutions. I mean, I'm coming back to my wife's thing. I like to solve problems, but I like people to kind of show that they've thought about what's happened and come with something themselves. So typically, I will talk to people. I say, if something goes wrong, think about what's going on and how you would solve the problem, and let's kind of use that as the starting point. We might not always agree that that's the right thing to do, but it then helps you to grow in terms of here's a problem, this is how I would solve it, and then that helping them and coaching and mentoring and training them to deal with those sort of situations.
Can I ask, Paul, did you have anyone who helped you on that leadership track? Because, look, we see a trend of people going into leadership roles, and it's because they're good at what they do. And then it's right, it's a natural progression for me. And then a lot of people suffer from imposter syndrome, and they struggle, just started thinking, why am I here? How can I do this? And I don't want to deal with people's stuff as well. You know what I mean? So did you have someone who, or were you more like, right, just get on with it. This is where I need to go in my career. I'll be okay.
So look, so I've been ambitious. I wanted to get ahead. So I am and have been quite self-motivated. There are people who have been in my life who have unofficially mentored me. I think of the guy that owned the shop in Whitley Bay. He helped me to. Because I was rough and ready when I worked for him. I didn't have any idea about the world. So he was somebody who helped me to form and shape. And then over the years, I've met met people who. So my father-in-law, for instance, I found him a really, really inspiring guy. From Northern Ireland, he was a guy that he was off a farm. He was illiterate. He was the second youngest off the farm. He had to leave Northern Ireland if he was ever to go ahead. And look, I could bore you for hours talking about him. But he was very inspirational to me in terms of he was a guy who had less than I did from an education point of view, but he just had drive and ambition, and I learned a lot from him. And so he was probably quite pivotal in terms of helping me. And then more recently, my next door neighbour, he's a little bit older than me, had his own business, and he's a guy that I will go and my wife hates me using this term. I'd go and spitball with him, ideas and things that are going on. So those people, within my career, there've been a couple of guys that have stood out for me. There's a guy I worked for in my first contract project management gig at Vodafone, and he was pretty inspirational. So I joined Vodafone as a deployment manager on contract. First gig out of Air New Zealand, and there was three of us in kind of like in leadership positions, reporting into the project manager, and he was the program manager. The project manager, when I arrived, was on sick leave, and he never came back. So the program manager, had obviously seen something in me and said, "Hey, look, would you take over the project manager role?" And I said to him, look, I haven't been formally trained. I said, I've worked on lots of projects at Air New Zealand, but I've never been the project manager. He said, don't worry, I'll coach you and teach you. And true to his word, he did. He was it's just similar sort of things that I've just explained to you. He would, if we were working through something and there was a problem, he said, well, Paul, what would you do? And we could talk that through. Sometimes he agreed with me, sometimes he didn't. But that helped me to kind of build my chops in terms of being a project manager and program manager and, my subsequent roles. And I remember one of my first steering committee meetings, and I was sitting outside and I had to present, and I was a little bit worried about the presentation. Didn't know these execs particularly well. And he said, we're sitting there waiting, and he said, look, he said, nobody's going to die. He said, you go in there. He said, you do your presentation. You've done it to other people. He said, they're just human beings, just like you and I. He said, you've got the information, go and do it. And I did, and it was fine. I mean, I had to refine over time because I was a little bit rough and ready with those presentations, but it was good enough to get the outcomes that we needed from the steering committee. It reminds me, I used that nobody will die mantra in quite a lot of team meetings to help people to feel safe about experimenting. And I did a little bit of time at Auckland District Health Board, and I was in a meeting, and we were talking about some things that we needed to do, and I was about to use that mantra, and I'm going, I can't use that one here. I can't use that one here because there is a possibility that down the track somebody could die if we make a really stupid decision here. So I've been a little bit more thoughtful about using that term going forward.
Yeah. And then the transformation side of things, it sounds like this is something that really so obviously moving into that project management type pathway, and obviously that mentorship and feeling that that's for you. So it's obviously led you to where you are today, and over the last obviously few years, you've been working for some big businesses, doing some big programs of work. So can you give us a bit of insight into maybe some of the highlights that led you to over the last while, and just some of the learnings as well from that?
Yeah, so look, you'll probably go back to my most recent gig, which was at AA. So I went into it. So this was a culmination of probably all my learnings over the years. I had to dig deep into my briefcase of skills and experience. So I initially went in there for a short-term assignment to work with. So they were the AA were a distributed model. They had lots of different business units, and they were all, incentivized individually. So they had their own project managers and BAs. They had their own, little ways of working. And then behind that, you had a kind of like an operations team. You had a digital team. A bit of a PMO team as well. So my initial role was to go in there, work with the different executives, because they had a backlog, I think, when I joined, of about 300 initiatives that what they wanted to deliver, right?
Wow.
And across those 300 initiatives, there was lots of duplication. So, this guy over here, wanted a booking system. This guy, wanted something similar. And we already had something within the ecosystem that was doing booking. So it was, working with the execs, trying to get them to start talking to each other, because they were moving to an enterprise model. So my gig was to understand all the different initiatives, reduce duplication, and to prioritize like a top 20, if you like.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of education with the executives around that, and I think we got it down to about 25 initiatives, but really, really hard to prioritize. So I did a lot of work behind the scenes with the IT team, getting some input and ideas from them into how to prioritize that and how they would prioritize that from their point of view. So we did a prioritization, and I went back into an executive meeting to talk to them, and I said, okay, so these are the 25 that we've dropped on, and this is this is the prioritization. And there was a lot of kerfuffle in that meeting around who prioritized this, and I said, well, I did. And they said, well, this is wrong. And I said, okay, great. There's a whiteboard over here. Let's spend this time, prioritizing it, because I had them in the room. So I, had their attention. So we were able to go through and prioritize it from their perspective, and then talk about, and educating them around dependencies. And, well, look, you can't do this one before you can't do this one before you've done this one. So, so we had a really open and great discussion around that. So that led me into my next part of my assignment was looking at looking at the maturity of the organization, but also looking at the capability to deliver those 25 projects or initiatives, if you like, because that was a lot, and they didn't have. So they had an ops team who were really, really scared and risk adverse. So they were and they had a proliferation of technology because of the distributed model. Lots of different things getting thrown into production. So they were really nervous about accepting new products and new technology into the platform. You had a digital team who were mostly focused on website and apps, and they worked in a different way as well. And then we had what everybody would nominally call a PMO, but they didn't want to use that word because it had some negative connotations for you. So we had kind of like a delivery team. So it was working around those three silos, if you like, and they were silos, to try and get a common ways of working. So we were then able to start to get some cadence of delivery and get some trust in one another. So listening to what the ops guys were saying around risk. Coming up some basic architectural principles about what do we think the future looks like for us? What do we think we're going to invest in? And those things help to decide what we were going to do and because they had they had Salesforce in there. They were looking at introducing Microsoft Dynamics again. I might be speaking out of turn here. Sorry, AA. But they need to make some fairly hefty decisions around what technology stack they were going to use going forward. So it was that initial setting up that maturity. You had digital who were agile. We brought in some consultant BAs and project managers who'd worked in agile, and they didn't work in quite the same way. So that whole induction, we had to look at it and say, well, what does agile mean? Then we started to look at when an initiative came in, how are we going to deliver it? We're very used to agile and waterfall type, but we're not that great at agile in an enterprise way. So as things came through, having to make decisions around what the delivery method was going to be. So then we started to look at frameworks and stage gating. So when something comes in, and I'm probably going into a little bit too much detail here, but I guess what I'm trying to illustrate is that journey and that, illustrating, where they were and the journey that they were going on. And that's really, where my interest lies, bringing my skills, helping to guide organizations, on that journey. I'm not an expert in all of those things. I'm more the guy that can look at, what do we need to look at first? Culture, people, and we had this concept and it seems to be being used more and more these days is, shift left. So IT were the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. So how do we climb up the cliff and become the ambulance at the top of the cliff? And then moving left all the time. So bringing the right sort of people into the room to have the conversations. So we could say no early. And I know that sounds odd, saying no, because we want to be yes, but there was a lot of industry and cost around, building some of these initiatives up. And after 6 months and you've spent quite a bit of money, and then we go, actually, I don't think that's the right thing to do. So, you're moving it the left so you can go, actually, we think it's a good idea, but not now. Or no, we don't think it's a good idea. So, you're using your resources, better, using your money better. And the other thing that and I really liked it at AA was they got really, really focused on their strategy, and we did a lot of work around, aligning those initiatives to strategy. So does it align with strategy? Yes or no? So if it's no, who's sponsoring this? And there were some genuine reasons to do some things that weren't aligned to strategy, but there was much more, finesse and looking into those things and prioritizing resources and money a lot better. And since I've left, they've got even I believe they're on an agile transformation now. But I feel great about the fact that I was part of the start of that journey as they moved on. So that's the sort of stuff that I like to do. And if you pull all of those things apart and then go back into my career, I did a little bit of portfolio here, I did a little bit of PMO here. I've done program management, I've done project management. So it was bringing all of those learnings together, and also those soft skills as well. So the executives were an interesting bunch, because they were moving from that distributed model to the enterprise model. A lot of those guys' roles were under the spotlight. Are they going to be part of the the new AA? And some of them weren't, and so that was hard for them as well. So you've got to be conscious when you're working with those people about some of the emotions that are going on around that as well. So being this can be a bit of an overused word in New Zealand, but being kind.
Yeah. You must get a lot of satisfaction though, Paul, based on obviously what you do and businesses that you work with, how many touch points across the organisation that you do. And when you come out of it and you actually look back at what you've achieved, you're probably not looking at what you've really achieved in that time. You know what I mean? Because it's all guns blazing.
Yeah.
Well,
look, it's interesting for me at the moment because I'm in that situation where I've come out of AA. I've done a little bit of consulting work, and I've been involved with the University of Auckland with their mentor program. But I'm looking for my next opportunity. And I think David, you mentioned earlier about imposter syndrome, and you're looking at some job descriptions sometimes. I don't know whether I can do that or not. And then you look back and go, hell, look at what I've actually achieved. So you need to be, quite positive about what you can do. And I'm maybe that's sorry, I banged my desk and got all wobbly. Maybe it's a Brit thing, I don't know, and where I came from. But and coming back to my my banking and finance career, I can be a bit of a blagger as well. So I can talk myself into things when I might not know everything that I need to know, but I'm confident enough that I think that I can figure it out. And look, 90% of the time that has worked for me. A few times it hasn't, and I've had to, admit that I didn't know what I was doing, but fortunately not that often.
Paul, just touching on, obviously it says you're on the market at the moment. You've done a bit of contracting in the last year and stuff like that, but this would probably be relevant to some of our listeners as well. Is like you've come, like I think the last time you came onto the market, it was a relatively buoyant market, and this market's so you've had some challenges, and just like the amount of opportunities that are out there, and and your experience in that, like there's a lot of similar people out there on the market at the moment, and everyone's looking for positivity and keeping your mindset right and stuff like that. But how have you found it, like, and how's it sort of like, how do you keep yourself in the right frame of mind?
Yeah, so look, I'm quite a positive person anyway. I mean, everybody has ups and downs, but I think it's about getting some structure into your day and what you're doing. So you cannot spend 8 hours a day looking for a job. That'll just drive you insane, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So my typical day is, so my energy tends to be more in the morning than in the afternoon. So I will get up and I will go for a walk, and and that's a good opportunity to think about things. What's going on today? What's going on this week? Who have I talked to? What are the opportunities that I think they are? So I go out and have my walk. I come back. I'll write out some of those thoughts, and then start to a couple of things. So have I got some opportunities that I'm looking at? Who am I talking to? When do I need to call them back? Spreadsheeting stuff. So I've found it was interesting. Last year I spent a lot of time in my network.
Yeah.
But last year was, and you guys will know, I mean, there was just there was no opportunities. Certainly at my level, or few. I know the few people are doing, quite well out of there, but I think probably their network is possibly a little bit more solid than mine. So last year, very much in my network, talking to people, having coffees, etc., etc. This year, I noticed when I came into 25, job roles were starting to be advertised. So I spent, quite a bit of time, curating my resume, curating my cover letters, and sending a lot of job applications. But I've kind of come to the conclusion that that's not the right approach for me. And so I'm going back and I'm pivoting back to networking, but I'm being a lot more structured than I was last year around, and being brutal. Who can help me, and who is, and I know some really great people out there who will have a coffee with me in a heartbeat, but they're not necessarily going to, move the dial for me.
Yeah.
So I'm having to be a lot more brave as well. So ringing people that I don't know. So I need to kind of work out my pitch, because people don't want a phone call and say, "Hey, I'm looking for a job. What have you got?"
Yeah.
So you've got to kind of work through that. And I'm seeing a lot of people. So I'm spending time with folk who are in the same situation as me, as kind of like a little bit of a support group. And we're talking about what's working and what's not working for one another in terms of putting that together. Look, my feeling is I think we had a bit of a false start in 25, and I think it's kind of petered out again because of global events. But I do think it's going to start to come up again soon. I'm not going to predict how long that's going to take. But organisations, there's only so much cost out that they can do.
Yeah.
They need to start to create for the future as well. And I think it's going to be a little bit of who's going to blink first. All it takes is somebody to go, right, okay, we're going to start investing in things. And then that whole competitor thing is going to start to kick in both locally and overseas.
Yeah.
So I think I'm hoping it's 25 because we're only just, coming to April and there's a long way to go. But who knows? This is a weird world that we're navigating at the moment.
It's great. It's great to hear that you have a strategy, though, because there is a lot of people out there who go down a spiral and just do what you say, just look at job pages constantly and just apply for jobs and get rejection after rejection after rejection. And I'm sure, and I'm sure levels of depression at the moment across New Zealand have skyrocketed. There's some like the other thing as well, there's a lot of senior people on the market and they do have financial constraints, because generally when you've been in a bigger role for a longer time, you have bigger financial commitments, like bigger mortgages and stuff like that, and lifestyle. So but by having a strategy and making sure that you follow, then that, well, I'll keep to my strategy, I'll keep myself honest, and you'll get there. You know what I mean? And the thing about it is, you'll get there. It's just, I'm sure it's frustrating at times, but you will get there. So I
think, to your point, and the other thing is that, I talked about you can't do this 8 hours a day. Some days or some weeks you might enter into and you go, I just can't be bothered. And that's okay. That's okay.
Exactly.
You've got to treat yourself well, because, mental health is super important. So have a day off, have a week off, but do something with it. Don't mope. I had a situation this week. So my daughter lives in Sydney. She came across for a week, and she took her dog that I've been looking after for 9 months away with her, and that was on Monday this week. And I hadn't realised how attached I'd become to this little guy, because he'd been on walks with me, every morning, and I was a little bit
heartbroken.
I was a little bit upset about it. So I dropped everybody off at the airport, and my wife had gone to work, and I'm at home, and I'm thinking, oh shit, I'm feeling sorry. I didn't mean to say, so I think, I'm a bit tired. I think I'll go and have a bit of a sleep. And I lay on the bed, and I couldn't get to sleep, and I went, oh, bugger this. So I went and did the housework. So I just got, full, because the kids have been, and they I don't know whether you've got kids or not, but they're not necessarily the tidiest people in the world. So, I vacuumed, I cleaned, and the other thing that I did, and we could get on a bit of a sideways conversation here very easily. I decided to do the ironing, but ironing is a bit boring just doing the ironing, right? So I stuck on Clarkson's Farm. I'd been meaning to watch it. I'd never watched it. So Jeremy Clarkson, oh my God, that just uplifted me.
I hear it,
because he's so irreverent, and I want to be a farmer now.
I think, well, it sounds as though you need to adopt a dog as well, first of all. That's maybe on the agenda, right?
No. So he's called Mr. Darcy, and there is only one Mr. Darcy. I can't replace him. So but I'll live vicariously through them because we get video calls and all the. Look, it's absolutely the right thing to do. It's her dog, and when she arrived and they saw each other again because they hadn't seen each other probably for about 6 months. We were sure we'd made the right decision.
Yeah. Nice. So tell us, in terms of the future, Paul, obviously it's a hard one to predict with how the economy's been and whatnot, but is there anything that you see from your perspective in terms of IT and how things are going to evolve or change in the future?
Yeah, so look, it's. I mean, the thing at the moment seems to be, AI and data. They are everybody is talking about that, which is absolutely great. I think some of the things that we as organisations need to start to look at and think about is the policies and the governance around those things. I know a lot of organisations are, really diving deep into AI and what it can bring, but we also need to think about think about cause and effect, right? There's a bunch of stuff that we're probably doing at the moment from an AI perspective that's going to have some ramifications in the future, and I think we need an eye to the future. I think it's great. I use a few different platforms. For myself, for research and helping, ChatGPT, Copilot, what's the other one? Is it you.me or something like that? To help me with, writing articles, writing cover letters, things like that. So I think it's great, but I just think we need to have a bit of an eye on the future around, what are the potential ramifications of the things that we're doing right now. So it could kind of get away from us. So I think AI is and data, obviously organizations, that's their gold. So how do they pull out the information that they've got on their on their products and their clients so they can pivot quickly to retain clients, to grow new sales and clients and things like that. So I think they're the things, and I don't think there's necessarily anything new there that I can talk to. But the other thing that I'm quite interested in is also around team culture. So one of the things I noticed when I was working at AA, and I come back to, I'm not the expert in the room, and people are on journeys themselves, so they will have some expertise, but they're growing too. So how do you build the culture into it and managing and encouraging people to grow? Because the risk is, and this is not a bad risk, is that they get so good that they become so other organisations will want them, but you don't want noddies either. That are just turning the wheel. So it's about balancing that. So how do you manage that culture where people will resonate if you look after them. They'll stay to a certain degree, but there are going to be some times where, hey, this is going to be a big step up for me if I go and do that, and they want to go and risk. But if you make the culture really good, they may come back as well. So they're the things that I'm interested in. And also, I think, David, you and I had this conversation a couple of weeks ago. We're talking about leadership and my passion around that. How do we also create career paths for people who are really good, but they're not good at people management and leadership? How do you harness that as well? And I don't know whether it's a size thing in New Zealand where we don't have that luxury to be able to have roles for people who are just technically brilliant, but keep them away from people. I don't know, but I haven't seen a lot of that opportunity in my in the companies that typically that growth comes that you have people that you need to manage as well and coach and mentor, and some people aren't good at that. I've been in situations with leaders that they come into a meeting and they kind of have like a checklist of how are you today, what do you do at the weekend and stuff like that. And I'm being a little bit OTT about it, but you get that it's not genuine, right?
Forced,
Yeah. So so how that's what interests me. How can you grow people who don't want to be leaders? They want to be really good at what they do, and how do you harness that without disrupting people?
I think it's definitely something that's being talked about more because it's a bit of a trend with some of the conversations we're having with leaders as well and people who've been through that journey. So cool. So look, Paul, I think that will do us for today. That was a really, really interesting chat. It was great to get to know you a bit better and know about your career and the things that obviously that you're passionate about. I've got one final question for you just before I close out the podcast. You talked about your vinyl collection. What's the crown and the jewels?
Steely Dan.
Steely Dan. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
is that a vinyl collection that you've been all your life, Paul, or like how long has it been gone?
So I had vinyl when I was younger, and then I went to CDs, and I got rid of most of my vinyl. I think I had like 30 records in a cupboard somewhere. About 5 years ago, my brother-in-law turned up for Christmas, and he gave me vinyl as a Christmas present. I'm going, this is kind of interesting. I don't have a turntable, and he said, well, you need to go and buy one. So I did, and that's been the start of the journey. And in fact, you wouldn't. On the other side of the screen is my cabinet with my vinyl in it, and it's I think it's a reasonable collection. There's about 550 records in there, but I've tended to go backwards in terms of buying records. So my wife and I were very when we first started dating. We were going to nightclubs and listening to a lot of 80s pop.
Yeah.
And so I've got a bit of that in there. Steely Dan, because the musicianship is just outstanding and I like the music. The other one, which is a nod to my where I come from, is Sting. And I've always been a big Police and Sting fan. And of course, he just comes from down the road from where I lived in the UK. It's a bit of an eclectic. Is it eclectic? Maybe some people would call it beige. I don't know. There's a bit of a mixture there of music.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
All right. No worries. All right. Well, look, we'll wrap things up there. Just wanted to say, thanks very much, Paul, for coming on the podcast. It was an absolute pleasure. To our listeners and viewers, if you continue to like the content, please give us a subscribe. Hit the subscribe button on the YouTube channel and a like and follow on the likes of Spotify and Apple. And we'll see you for the next one. Thanks very much for your time.